Hello, everyone, and welcome to Best of Three. Once again, joined by rekenner and RNG here to recap this past weekend's ETS along with the LCQ. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing good, Bob. How are you?
Wonderful. A little sore from work, but other than that, I'm alright.
I'm doing well. We got our camera back today. Hoping it can last the whole episode this time.
Hopefully. So this weekend was definitely very interesting. Lots of stuff to go into. We'll go right into what made it interesting, the campaign.
Yeah.
So,
Came out last Wednesday, was immediately legal for the ETS.
I'm glad it came out on Wednesday rather than Friday.
Yes.
Things a little bit better for people to test.
It would not have been legal if it came out on Friday. Our general line is 4 days afterwards, or 4 days from launch, I think. So it just snuck in under the wire, but it was good to see. There were a lot of shake-up cards on there, and a bunch of them were actually featured all the way to the finals, including a couple of sleeper hits.
Yeah, I think each one of these cards, the 6, were in a top 8 deck. I think Draco was in the found list. I could be, yeah.
Yeah, one of the Huru decks. So a minimum of 6 out of 25 cards had immediate top 8 level impact. First weekend in, so this was not.
There was a 7th, we just don't have it up, which is Ribknife Assassin.
Yep.
Okay, so a whole bunch of cards saw immediate impact and gave us another another metagame shakeup, which is what, our third now in 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Where we've done total about faces and where we're going.
Yeah, it went from Argenport to what was it, aggro. Now it's to super slow control. Like it's all over.
It's all over the place. All right. So let's.
It is the right type of meta for a certain type of player.
Mm-hmm. I think the one card that may have surprised most people was Equivocate. It turned out to be like people looked at it and were like, "Oh, that's probably pretty good," but from what I've heard and also from me playing it, it's really good.
So I think what happened was a lot of people looked at Equivocate, saw it was an Elysian, and dismissed it because Elysian has been one of the worst performing decks this season, putting up such incredible win rates as 10% over 5 decks, 14% over 5 decks, 30%. So consistently under 50%. And I don't want to jump ahead too far, but this week it put 2 players into the top 2 and still managed a 50% win rate overall. So Elysian is not the most exciting color combination to be in, but Equivocate is a really interesting card for Elysian decks to have access to. A lot of the time before, if they wanted to kill fatties, they needed to play the awkward polymorph or Surso plus some kind of killer effect where they didn't necessarily always have a Surso in play, unfortunately, even though they would like to, one of the deck's better cards. Equivocate is both a teleport and a transform effect. So it bounces whatever threat your opponent played, usually for tempo value, and it can transform it into something else. Usually, since people, for the most part, unless they're playing Chalice, play good cards in their deck, it'll turn them into something less valuable. So you get something good there. Nobody wants to play the 3/3 for 4 instead of Sandstorm Titan or whatever.
Yeah. The only thing is if the player has face Aegis, it will not transform
it. There's some interesting interactions with that card in face Aegis at the moment. We'll be keeping an eye on that in terms of legality for the Invitational, possibly, but hopefully that gets hotfixed by Direwolf sometime early in the week.
Yeah, this was... but besides from being another patch that dropped a whole bunch of new cards, this was the patch that broke everything. Premiums were back to showing their graphical glitches. Half the old bugs are back. We have some new bugs with a lot of cards. Popping face Aegis drops the game.
I think that may have been fixed.
That one did get hotfixed on the Friday, yes. But it was not the smoothest sailing.
I will say about Equivocate, the first time I had an Elysian deck fast spell disrupt a double block was when I really went, oh, that's why this card is insane. Because typically speaking, unless Elysian was playing actual factual teleport, they didn't have a way to really mess with combat math. What you saw was what you got. And yeah, they could play a Xenon Obelisk and interrupt what you had planned the combat math to be when you passed your turn, when you declared your attacks. But usually your declared blocks were your declared blocks and you were safe. But that's not true anymore. And that is terrifying when Elysian can usually have the biggest fatties on the board unless, you know, a Mystic Ascendant is going off or something along those lines.
Yeah. Equivocate is a card that plays out a lot better than it looks. Aside from its standard usual teleport shenanigans, transforming that unit is very valuable because one of the main things that Elysian relies upon for its removal is permafrost. And so it runs into problems with endurance units like Sandstorm Titan and Tavrod in the past. AP Mid just ate Elysian for breakfast. So being able to bounce those, or, you know, Inquisitor Macto, get rid of the Revenge, pop a deadly unit out of the way in addition to the tempo, is quite powerful, because usually you play actual teleport, they just replay the unit and you only bought yourself a turn for tempo. But now it can permanently get rid of one of your opponent's threats. And yeah, they play some other guy, but Elysian doesn't really care about random bodies in the way as long as they're not too disruptive. And as a bonus, you can target your own units with this if you really want to. You know, scoop up your false prints, get a 0-drop. Okay, maybe that's not quite the best use for it, but you know, pulling back a Cerso or a Sandstorm Titan and getting another 5 or 6 drop can be pretty good into the control matchup where it otherwise wouldn't have as much use.
And of course, it can, you know, effectively break a polymorph off a unit. Yes, you're downgrading your unit. Yes, you lose tempo. In terms of that, you have to play 2 plus the unit's cost, but that can still be better than just not having a unit on the board.
And sometimes when you can't break through any other way, you can pick up something expensive and try to get, you know, charge unit, Soulfire Drake, whatever. So, plays a lot better than it looks.
Yep, definitely agree.
A card that played exactly as good as it looks is the primal card next to it, Hailstorm. It looks like it kills aggro, and boy, did it kill aggro this weekend.
Yep.
Yeah, it did. We saw almost 0 aggro decks this weekend, but I believe we'll talk about that a little bit more directly later. But you know, the thing about this card you might note is, so if you've played a lot of Lightning Storm reliant decks before, you might say, well, okay, how much better than this really is? How much better than Lightning Storm really is this? You know, it's harder to cast, especially in a 3-color deck. Double Primal is pretty real. You know, the number of times you've not been able to cast Wisdom of the Elders on turn 3, it's the exact same requirements for this card. But when you look at the cards that aggro decks are playing, Rekenner was almost immune to Lightning Storm, with the exception of Rekenner Outlaw and Oni Ronin and unactivated Steady Marshals. But Rekenner had a 1-drop that could avoid Lightning Storm. And so if they curve Steady Marshal into Chaglo, into Whirling Duo, or Unseen Commando, you could sometimes just look at a hand with a Lightning Storm in it and go, oh, I see. This card is dead. You know, sometimes you can double Storm and things like that. And, you know, even Stone Scar. If they curve Instigator into Champion of Chaos, sure, their deck would, you know, sometimes have 1-drops that you, in theory, can kill, and Bandit Queen and Highwayman die to it, but they've often done at least 4 or 5 damage to you in the worst case scenario. Whereas this card, Instigator, dead. Champion of Chaos, dead. Every single unit in Rekenner that does not get a weapon or a Warcry, dead.
So 3 turned out to be a really important breakpoint against aggro decks, and the thing that really goes for it is that 3 power is more than 2 power by a fair margin. You know, whenever you get lower in cost, the differences in power become more apparent, but it's not so much that you're not able to play it against aggro. You know, 4 is the critical turn for a lot of aggro decks, and the fact that you can on the draw come down on or you can come on the draw with this card and clean up their turn 4 play and just sort of have a fresh board against them is really good, because previously you needed to like be ahead of them and then have your turn 5 be Harsh Rule to clean up the board in the same way. You know, Devastating Setback didn't quite do it, and card is a lot more powerful at cleaning up than Devastating Setback is.
Yes.
So
You can use,
I do also. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
you can use 2 of these to kill a Sandstorm Titan, or bigger things where
Yes.
2 Lightning Storms just they kill something with 4 rather than something with 6. Like that's when used into doubles, it's by far just outstanding
Yes.
with this card.
It's much better to draw multiple Hailstorms against mid-range decks than it is to draw multiple Lightning Storms, because they can actually combine to be a board wipe.
Yeah, Tavrod and Reality Warden are kind of the only cards that are seeing any amount of play that double Hailstorm doesn't kill.
Champion of Mystery? No? Nostrix is the other big one.
Oh, yes, Nostrix.
And a nice segue into our latest new Reality Warden. Another Primal card. Shockingly, there's 3 on this list. Daraka, the Queen's card.
Of course, it also doesn't kill Daraka. That's very true.
There's actually 4 Primal cards.
Yes.
Pacifier.
I was blinded by all that green.
Yeah.
2 Primal cards, 2 Hybrid Primal cards.
Yeah, we actually showed off Daraka last week when it got released.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit. We said, hey, this card could be good in some of the more aggressive Primal decks, and it turned out that, hey, this card was pretty good in some of the more aggressive Primal decks. A 7/7.
Some of the more mid-range Primal decks and some of the more control Primal decks. And
it turns out big bodies are pretty good in this game. And Ice Sprite's effect, when it's attached to a 7/7 Overwhelm instead of a 1/2 Flyer, is a lot more threatening, both as a tempo play and just as a way to punch through big chunks of damage.
Yeah, when Ice Sprite's effect is on a body that doesn't die to Torch, it's a little better. To be fair, this does die to Annihilate, and you can still end up with a lot of bad combat math situations because of that. But a 7/7 is a little harder to profitably block than a 1/2.
It's a little safer against fire in particular. Very tough for fire to burn it out.
Yeah, and it having overwhelm is also a great thing for it too.
Mm-hmm. Reality Warden gets chumped all day by Temple Scribe. This card does not, which makes it better against some of the decks that, as weird as it is to say, some of these Primal X mid-range decks struggled with, like Grenadins. Having a large overwhelm threat to punch through was certainly valuable.
Yeah.
So another good breakout card there. That's 3 good hits for Primal. Not too much to say about Daraka that we haven't already said in the past, other than while it says whenever you play an island, for a while it was bugged to play when anybody plays an island, which loyalty beyond boundaries.
We got reports that it was one of our tournament players mentioned that they were playing against Patrick Chapin on ladder. They had a Daraka out. Patrick Chapin played an island. The island got Aegis, and Chapin immediately conceded, presumably because he had discovered the bug because of that, or felt that he was getting an unfair advantage because of the bug interaction. It's an interesting little anecdote about that one.
Yeah. So the last card in Primal, unfortunately, that saw a large splash amount of play was the I call him Hoothoot, but he's Huru Pacifier. The Runehammer's worst nightmare. It's
also Vanquish's worst nightmare. Also Torch's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Annihilate. It avoids removal as well.
Hailstorm's worst nightmare / best friend.
Yep. Yes. Oh yeah. One point about Hailstorm. The interesting inclusion that I thought was it saw play in Elysian Midrange, where it is kind of shoring up Elysian Midrange's weak spot, which is it used to get run over by faster decks. And this can act as a Plague Wind, as a one-sided board wipe effect in decks that don't play anything smaller than 4 health.
Yep.
So this isn't actually totally out of the ordinary. Back when Jido was a big deck and Rally Queen was a thing, way back in closed beta, right when Elysian was picking up popularity, they usually ran 4 Lightning Storm. Because you had no other way to interact with these aggro decks. So you either high rolled and had Storm, or you died.
Yeah.
So the inclusion, especially on ladder, was, considered to be a worthwhile investment. So Elysian plus board wipe is cool to see coming back. That's for sure. Bit of a throwback there to a time before. But yeah, 3-4 for 3, hell of a stat line. 2 relevant combat skills, and oh, by the way, you can't play weapons, which means rune hammers are gone, plates are off the table, and Inquisitor's Blade, another one of the new cards, is no longer an option for these players. So Hoover got a big beater, and unsurprisingly, Hoover Midrange made an immediate jump back into the spotlight, both on the back of Hoover Pacifier and the new Duraka
and
came into play.
Pacifier also being an unseen has put it in a couple of other decks. There's like a GPS unseen deck now playing it. It's doing pretty good. I played a little bit of it. It's pretty fun. But yeah, it's funny that you have the bird with Overwhelm. Just like, what second battle skill can we throw on this thing? That's kind of what the Overwhelm feels like.
So Overwhelm plus flying is, at my count, 2 battle skills, which means that it works with everybody's favorite unseen Commando.
Yeah, to some extent, it kind of feels to me like they felt like they looked at this card. They had, it had flying, it had the stat line, it had the text, and they said, "Wait a second, this doesn't work with unseen Commando. How can we fix that?" And they didn't want to give it Aegis because that would just be insane. Aegis kind of being Hoover's other primary keyword.
That would be an obnoxious card. 3/4 flying Aegis players can't play weapons?
Yeah. That card would be broken in half. And both Primal does get Overwhelm. Justice not so much. So it is not completely out of left field, but it does sort of have 2 forms of evasion, which is a little awkward. But you can't chump block this with, I guess, Valkyrie Instigator, but that's the 3/4 stat line in the air is pretty solid already, but it getting buffed to a 4/5 by Unseen Commando isn't actually that impressive. A lot of 5/5 flyers or sometimes 0/5 flyers exist right now.
Shelter Wing and Impending Doom being the main 2, and still cannot attack through a Sandstorm Titan. But Hoover's got a couple vanquishes to deal with that, so not the biggest worry. Personally, I like to think that this was always a mono primal card, and people would play it in like Feln or Elysian instead of Hoover with the Unseen Commando, and so they made it play better with Unseen Commando by adding 2 Justice influence to it and making it multi-faction. I don't think that's true, but it's a nice story.
Maybe it was just an owl. And then they were like, no, let's make it unseen.
Let's make it a ninja owl.
Yeah. And the last card of the 6 that are kind of the hot topics, Inquisitor's Blade, kind of mentioned slightly before, but definitely gave a slight return to AP mid.
Yes. Yeah, we'll be highlighting the deck that BBG and Tony G used this last weekend shortly, but this card surprised me because I didn't somehow think of the Tavrod plus Inquisitor's Blade interaction. The first time I saw that, my reaction was just, "Oh, this is filthy."
Yeah, it's attack, draw a card. Oh, it goes right on it, gives it flying.
Yeah, and note the Tavrod gets flying before you declare blocks.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
So, for those that aren't too familiar, since this is a new card and maybe one that hasn't seen too much ladder play yet, Inquisitor's Blade has the closest you can get to Revenge, and it's Macto Revenge. It never ends. So whenever Inquisitor's Blade goes away, it goes into your top 10 cards and gains Destiny. So if Tavrod, Tavrod usually anti-synergy with Revenge cards. If Tavrod picks up an Inquisitor's Blade, it comes into play right away. So Tavrod gives himself +8, +1, and flying for a nice 13-point bunch. Yes, you're not chump blocking that with a Grenadin.
Yeah, just when we thought the cow was wrangled.
Also works very well with Interrogator, buffing that up, curving out nicely, and punching in for 7. And you're not too concerned if it dies because you get your Inquisitor's Blade back. So a good way to avoid getting 2-for-1 when piling weapons on a unit, and giving evasion on a real weapon is it's a pretty big game. I expect to see a lot more of Inquisitor's Blade in the future, as it gives both immediate and long-term value, unlike the previously pretty common 4-drop of Hammer of Might, which it puts all of its value into the long game with the Warcry 3.
Well, I feel like Inquisitor's Blade plus plus Tavrod is a lot more than the sum of its parts. Kind of like Arc Interrogator's inclusion in AP Mid when they're not running as many ways to buff it to give the card draw effect. I've tried Inquisitor's Blade in a couple of other decks and have been completely underwhelmed by it. Specifically, Cambrai aggro. I think every game I won, I drew like 0 to 1 weapons total. And every game where I drew weapons, I just kind of lost because, yeah, it can come back, but you're still getting 2 for 1 in the immediate sense, and it requires a unit to be on the board for the Destiny to activate. It doesn't go to your hand. It just goes directly into your void. Just one smooth motion, whoop, gone.
It's very difficult for Destiny cards to stick around in your hand for any length of time.
Exactly, of course.
Okay, so we have dithered around with the campaign for...
Did we talk in Cold Blood? I don't think we did.
No, we didn't. But we'll probably end up talking about that a little bit more later, so we can probably actually transition topics.
Woo!
So, as we indicated before, Elysian Midrange was a very common deck today, or rather this last weekend, sorry. And as a note, this is only the stats for the weekly. We did not actually include stats for the Last Chance Qualifier. We usually don't because it's a modified pool of players. And it's a bit overly affected by the tournament that happened the exact previous day, as we've discovered. Elysian Midrange, two decks in the top 2 was a little overrepresented in the LCQ, but we won't really talk about that too much. But yeah, so we saw a 50% win rate for the deck, despite the fact that it had 2 people in the top 2. Which usually that, when you see that combination, you see a deck, having an absurd win rate, like 80%. Or,
78% for the 2 Argenport midrange decks that made top 8?
Exactly.
So those were the 2 standouts of the weekend, the 2 Elysian midrange decks that were successful, and the Argenport midrange decks that brought themselves back. It turned out Protect was actually the only piece of the deck nerfed, and they were able to transition a few new cards in to fill in the gaps. And hey, I mean, you can still play Argenport midrange. It's still got Slay. It's still got Tavrod. Yeah. So still playing some good pieces. Felon Control with its 55% Felon Control win rate.
As a quick note about that, the classification between mid-range and control for this week was a little wobbly. There are some decks that were definitively control and some decks that were definitively mid-range, and a lot of decks that were doing things like playing what looked like control, but also Daraka and like a gift, or they were playing, some weird things. We kind of lumped these stats together, and we'll see if the decks kind of stratify themselves as time goes on.
Yeah, Felon Control's in an odd spot. Cause, you lost Vera, so what are you playing on your top end? You're playing Channel.
We appear to have lost RNGEe.
Oh, and then Daraka comes out. It's another top end card that's decent, but it's the only card that gets hit by Annihilate in the deck, so it's awkward.
That was cool. Yeah.
But yeah. Felon Control, I see adapting slightly. It's just there's so many variations of the list. I don't know if someone's going to find the right list.
Yeah. I think you can still play a more control style without Daraka, but Channel of the Tempest is certainly not as good of a win condition as Varn.
No, there's with so many face ages out right now, it's not as reliable.
To some extent, it's kind of a high roll Champion of Cunning deck. If your champions are all on the bottom, you have a much lower chance of winning than you used to, where, if Avara can bring back a Black Sky Harbinger or a Rindra, you still had game. Whereas now, if, your champions are all bottom 30, 40 cards, it seems almost impossible to win if your opponent has a face Aegis.
Yep.
Yeah, and the rest of the decks were a story of woe for the most part. with just about everything else on the list having a sub 50% win rate. Praxis squeaked by at 50, but Huru was down. FTJ, Lucaria Blue, JPS, TGP, Voda Combo. And it was really the rogue decks that were the ones that were winning all the games out there. But everything there was a one-off, so very difficult to fit all of those on the on the meta breakdown.
Yeah, just a bit. Let's take a peek at what did make top 8.
Yeah, so we see Bruised by God with his style of AP midrange, which is Inquisitor's Blade, Crown Watch Paladin, Crown Watch Traitor. Outrack with a Huru aggro deck, which is a very interesting deck that we will be covering a little bit more in depth later. Second Blue running Xenon midrange. Herad running Film Control. Serb playing Elysian Horn. Aroma Nova playing FJP Plate. Unearthly playing his style of Argentport midrange, which is a bit closer to the way the deck ran in set 2. And Sugleg coming in tiebreakers with his style of Elysian midrange.
Yeah, it was definitely a vastly different top 8 when you compare it to the previous week. You see 2 AP midrange decks. You haven't seen that in a while. Second Blues take on
Elysian in top 8 in quite some time.
Second Blues take on Xenon, much different. Even the Xenon Killers, the Interrogator list, it was a slightly different take on even that.
Yeah, he was running actual main deck Devour, and some other interesting decisions. The Temple Scribe, you play it, it's a roadblock, it chump blocks. Oh, and then you Devour it. So kind of drew 3, gained 3 health, plus blocked a unit for a turn. And of course Devour plus, is very good if you're having removal pointed at your units.
Yeah, he was just massively outdrawing these control decks, which was impressive. It was definitely a good call for this weekend with the amount of control that showed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we saw the FJP Plate deck come back. I mean, Plate can just do so many things for that type of deck. You can just win immediately when you play a Plate. So even if you have all the
Shelterwing Rider plus Shelterwing Rider plus Plate is quite possibly the most obnoxious two-card combo in the game.
Shout out to Champion of Cunning plus Witching Hour, both unnerfed, of course.
In the current game.
Yeah. There was a time when it was worse. But so we had the Elysian face-off in the semis, not in the finals like I thought.
Sorry. Yeah, I believe I've been saying that too. It was, in fact, a time mid-range face-off that was Xenon versus Elysian.
And then on the other side, you had Huru versus Xenon. So everything in 3 colors. So no fire or shadow was making it to top 4 this weekend. And there really wasn't a lot of fire that weekend.
No, I believe there was 1 fire deck in the top 8 of this and 1 in the top 8 of the last chance qualifier.
Yeah, not a lot of torches.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the winner's deck and dig down into what exactly was successful.
One of the first things I noticed when looking at this list, it doesn't have Obelisk.
Yeah, so it also happily doesn't have Scouting Party.
Yes.
We finally moved on from playing this.
With Hailstorm around, I don't think you're gonna spend 6 when they just spend 3. It's just It doesn't seem to make sense.
So the interesting part of this list is, well, most of it, honestly, but we're big on the beaters this time. You're playing the full pack of World Bears and the full 4 Durakas, with only 1 Crystallized to punch through. So Crystallized is really more of an afterthought than it is a primary game plan. You're not looking to board stall and then crystallize them out. You're playing. They're also playing a 4 Praxis Displacer to equivocate, so a big bounce sub team. Interestingly, we see a couple of Ageless Mentors sneaking in there to buff up some of the late game cards. That's a card that was very popular for a while, especially in the in the Lightning Storm era of the Elysian Midrange decks, but has really fallen out of favor, and it's interesting to see it back, sort of playing the role of the missing obelisk here by buffing up the units directly, and then letting you punch through. And then we've got no, just I was just noting that we got the Dawnwalkers back proud here with so many things to bounce them back, and then the omnipresent False Prince and Friendly Wisp for card draw.
As a note, this deck did not include Hailstorm in the 90, probably because it is running things like Initiate of the Sands, Initiates plus two-sided sweepers, kind of a non-bow combo.
Yeah,
you don't want to ramp yourself up to 3 power and then put yourself back to 2.
Initiate, they play a 2-drop. Hailstorm.
Exactly.
Got you.
It's only running 2 total killer effects in the 2 Xena initiation. We've seen a little bit of Twilight Hunt in the decks because you're running for World Bear Behemoth and you're running for Amber Monument that the Rhinarch is in fact a dinosaur. So it kind of can act as a Xena initiation for 1 less cost.
Mm-hmm.
But this deck is running a lot of things that will die to Hailstorm, but that also act as roadblock units against aggro. Mm-hmm. You are eventually okay with your Initiative of the Sands blocking an X1. Once a Friendly Wisp has been activated, it's just a 1/1. Put it in front of something. Ageless Mentor, while it does come out on 3, can stand in front of a lot of 1 and 2 drops. Amber Acolyte, once it's drawn you a power, can be thrown under the bus, so on and so forth.
So we talked a lot about how good Equivocate was, and then they're only actually playing 2 copies between main and sideboard. This may sound kind of funny, but there's a limit to the number of teleport effects that you can play, and with 4 Praxis Displacer already, 6 is probably pushing it, especially when you've got 4 Permafrost, 4 Jaraka to push through.
Yeah.
So lots more ways for this Elysian deck to interact than you traditionally expect it to.
And if you're running Ageless Mentor, running the Praxis Displacer probably makes a bit more sense because it becomes a 5/4.
Yep.
Which is a real unit instead of a 3/2, which is not.
Yeah, in most lists I've been seeing, Equivocate's been either a 2 or a 3. I've never seen a 4, full 4 of. And also, it's interesting there's no Carnosaur either. That feels like the one outlier.
So the easy, well, Jaraka's sort of taken the place of Carnosaur because it's bigger. It has a battle skill, and it permanently deals with a threat of any size. Well, I say permanently, but as long as it remains on the battlefield. So it doesn't open you up to, Scorpion Wasps. You're still kind of vulnerable to Annihilate, but it just ends up being the more aggressive card most of the time. Because a lot of the things you can't deal with Jaraka, you also can't deal with like Carnosaur, such as Tavrod, our favorite. Okay. Let's take a look at our next slide then, which is meta trends for the weekend, which is sort of what we've been talking about. Throughout this entire thing, but it is worth noting, Stonescar did not make the list of played decks. We were talking about this Stonescar Slingers deck that had come out and was was hideout pistoling people and queening in, and that's gone.
Yeah, it was the menace of the meta in 3 different iterations. The original list running 2, then 3, then 4 Soulfire Drakes. Well, Soulfire Drake got nerfed, but Champion of Chaos is a gunslinger. And that was, then a few iterations on that deck were played, but mostly people were bringing in like Madness.
Madness with Shara.
Yeah.
And that became a big thing, and people were saying, "Hey, we can't play units anymore." And then they printed a card that kills the whole deck. We mentioned Rakano dies to Hailstorm. Everything in that particular iteration of Stonescar also died to Hailstorm.
Yeah, they were playing Assembly Line, that card just got so much worse. And with that Stonescar deck, it made it hard to play like these time mid-range decks could just get Madness, Combusted. So Elysian was definitely like just in a rough spot. And then, there's a card that pushes this one deck out. Elysian's just like, yeah, we can finally do something.
And time got to come back in a big way with a couple of additions, and really the big meta shift away from the aggro decks meant that time decks didn't actually need to play Hailstorm themselves. They sort of enjoyed aggro's falling back. Aggro will be back, but it will need to be back in a form that either doesn't die to Hailstorm or takes advantage of the fact that people are off of Hailstorm.
Yeah.
And this is as good of a time as any to talk about the Justice Hate card that just entered the metagame.
Yeah, they so thoughts on the cards of this, thoughts on the design of this card aside for a little bit. We had 3 decks with Justice in the top 8 of the LCQ and of the weekly. Notably, Unearthly, had a match early on where he lost a game because of In Cold Blood causing him to discard another Tavrod. We've seen a lot of reaction to this card, but while it's very strong, it may not reliably be able to do, kind of kill Justice on its own. It is still I think we're seeing 4 cost is kind of the universal removal with an upside cost. Feeding Time has the upside of getting rid of Entombs and Reanimation. Deathstrike has the upside of being fast. And this card has the upside of saying target Justice player maybe loses the game.
Although Kamato did famously win with FJS removal pile despite losing his Icarius and his Maktos to Cold Bloods, but that's really much more the outlier than the norm. The main thing holding this card back is the fact that it's only found its way into Felnless at the moment as a hate card for Justice, and Feln has a couple of other problems that Hailstorm does address, but the builds aren't quite the cleanest right now. They're mainly anti-aggro and weren't as ready for the time mid-range. Losing Withering Witch has really hurt the mid-range matchups of the Feln decks.
Yes, it's no longer really possible for Feln to get an X for 1 by because of their opponent overextending, or I guess X for 2 technically.
Yeah, Feln basically needs to play Channel the Tempest to get card advantage, because you don't have Vera, you don't have Withering Witch combos, you don't have those card advantage techniques that you need to go over the top of the mid-range decks. And that's why Feln only put a single copy into the top 8 today, given the extreme mid-range metagame. Like you said, sort of leaning more and more and more on Champion of Cunning. And last time we saw that happen, we had 30 damage out of hand. So Champion of Cunning not quite as powerful this time, but it has a lot of heavy lifting to do. And while In Cold Blood does give the deck a great matchup against some of the Justice decks, a lot of percentage points back there, in general, it's not quite well situated to fight it out in this metagame. You talked earlier about Devour being played in the Xenon decks for value, Permafrost not being quite what it was with Equivocates and things. Praxis Displacer very good against Permafrost, bouncing your unit. So not quite as tuned, and it's a little bit tough to be on the Feln train at the moment. But that's really the only natural home for In Cold Blood, and I think that's really what's keeping it from doing as much meta warping as I personally expected it to do.
I believe there was an article on the front page of the website, fleetingly for a little while, on
my
Saturday
feelings
about
on this are poorly documented, but
I do like that it does
strong.
have that clause of taking out your own Justice influence if you have any.
Right. That feels like it's saying you're not allowed to play this in Argenport, because if Argenport could play this, Argenport would again be the best solution to Argenport itself.
Yeah, it would make that mirror matchup just who drew Cold Blood, who drew more.
We're trying not to make every mirror matchup in the game who draws their one card that matters first.
Yeah.
We get enough of that with Stone Scar and Chalice mirrors and Feln mirrors and any unitless control mirror and Armory mirrors, and
you just gotta run Scorch. He's a good man.
Okay, so I think that covers our basic meta trends as we skip around randomly. to the LCQ, so we can talk about some more metagame stuff.
Yes.
And specifically the winners.
Yep.
Yes, we see Tony G making it into the top 8 with Bruised by Gods, AP Midrange, Moosh with FJS Removal Pile, Herad on Felon Control for the second time in 2 days, Propicitus on Unearthly Style of AP Midrange, HeyYu on Felon Control, The Sol on TPS Roaches, Quertsy on Xenon Midrange, and ARENGEE on FJP Plate. And our 4 winners of the Winnin' round were Tony G, HeyYu, Quertsy, and Herad. The Tony G being a known name, but the other 3 are breaking into the tournament scene basically for their first time. Again, Herad played kind of ran his deck back from the previous day, and this time managed to get into the Invitational.
Yep. Second time around works. They ran the same list, both Herad and HeyYu. Same list that he ran from the day before. It worked once. Let's try it again. And put 2 of them into the Invitational. So maybe there's something to this style of Felon Control. But we'll take a look at that in a little bit.
Anyone who makes a deep run into the ETS on Saturday is going to have a difficult time making any major changes for Sunday.
Yeah.
Just especially if you're in EU, because it's already midnight and you got to sleep and
Herad is notably.
Yeah. So not a big surprise to see people running it back. This was a 44-person tournament, I believe. So the largest LCQ we've ever had. And as some of you will remember, players who have already qualified for the Invitational are not allowed to play in the LCQ. So we took about 20 players out of the pool, and we got about our player base minus 20 back. So that's pretty good. You usually see a bit steeper of a drop off. So some good competition. Really interesting to see Roaches in the top 8. Not a deck that anybody has really been talking about, and definitely one that we would have been spotlighting it had it won that critical 7th game.
Indeed.
In the top 8, but a cool deck to see popping up.
As Mark, aka Chibi Kawai, pointed out during the cast on Saturday, this is not the first time it has lost a winning in an LCQ, as Mark himself was one piloting it. But it's a deck that kind of makes sense in that it's a deck that is kind of the ceiling of the format in a way. If you don't kill the Roaches deck will eventually kill you. It might come down to them flashing in 4 10-10 ambush, Aegis, double damage Roaches at the end of a turn after a harsh rule or something along those lines. But even decks like Voda Combo or other decks that have been kind of considered to be the ceiling of the format do have to beat the Roaches deck before the Roaches can turn into 10-10s, 12-12s with every keyword in the game.
So to clarify, a Roaches deck that has drawn and played and stuck a crown will eventually beat every other deck in the format.
That is true.
With the exception of Echo Macto, which has been removed due to some well-placed nerfs. Macto does his thing a little bit faster, and
that's true.
Roaches can't beat a board of 12 Mactos. And that Vera Infinite combo that Overmaster popularized. I don't know who actually created that, with the Slumbering Stones and the Umbred Reapers. Although that's a real difficult deck to play because every card in that deck is bad nowadays. So, pretty close to the ceiling of the format. Just very slow. But with a mid-range metagame that we saw yesterday, maybe a good time to bring it out. And if people keep going for like these controlling slow decks, especially actual control, if you can land those crowns, you're going to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
If crowns still gave double echo, I hesitate to imagine what the metagame would look like.
Probably pretty terrifying, honestly.
Green crown, here are the people, I believe.
So we've talked about how the top 8 of the weekly. We've talked about the top 8 of the last chance qualifier. Let's talk about what they were trying to aim for. Who's managing to make it into the Invitational. So we now have most of the people that are going to be playing in the Invitational known.
So
We have
this might be a good time to hop in with a little bit of a description of what the Invitational is, so to speak.
That's a very good idea.
If you want me to pop over on that one. So the Invitational is a 32-person invitational tournament, hence the name, where all the players qualify via one or more feats of greatness. Whether that be winning a weekly event, we get 8 winners from our 8 seasons. Whether that be top 4 in the LCQ as sort of a last chance to sneak in, or by getting invited based on high SP. And this is always a high IP. Sorry, this is always a highly contested event, and never more so than this season, where 18 points was tiebreakers. As always, the highest it's ever been. But attendance continues to grow, and we did have an 8-round tournament, which inflated numbers, and moving from 6 rounds to 7 rounds is the norm, has done so as well.
As well as players having 8 chances to get their best 4 results as opposed to just 7.
Yes, we have increased the number of both rounds in which players can earn points, and tournaments, yes, in which players can play those rounds to get their best results. I lost myself there. Rounds was actually meant to be for like number of tournaments they could play. But walk us through some of the winners, Rek, while I compose myself.
Will do. So we have our weekly winners, which were Alarmadillo way back in the first week of the season, Darkness, Croge, current world champion, but winner of last year's world champions, Kamado, Lord Foz, Child Roland, Manu S, and Suckleg. Then our 4 rookie invitational spots went to Second Blue, who is now I believe 4-time Hall of Fame record holder, our rookie of the season by far.
So far.
Yes.
There's, as you can see just from the rookie page, there's 4 people who are not far behind him at all.
Of course. Then, Farad's Bro, Nyamster, and Outtrack rounding out the rest of the rookies who all had very good seasons. And then finally we get to our IP invites. So that would be Danabor, Bruised by God, Kang Breath, Level 13 David, The Tristero, Unearthly Chrysalio, Alissimo, Jez, Trumpets, Mux Osk, Tin Man, and finally Missing Toes. And now, if you're paying attention and can do a little bit of basic math, you might notice that, and of course, the LCQ top 4 are Tony G, HeyYU, Quartzy, and Red. LCQ top 4, 8 weekly winners, 4 rookie winners. The number of IP invites doesn't add up to the missing slots. Unfortunately, or fortunately for those who like chaos, we have a tiebreak situation for the remaining players at 18 points.
And there are a lot of them.
Yes.
10 in all, although a couple of them removed themselves from the pool by quickly declining their invites, or in Tony G's way, by winning the LCQ or their LCQ slots, as tiebreak players are always allowed to participate in the LCQ and win their slots outright. But for the rest of them, they're going to be playing some form of tiebreaker on Friday night with their invitational deck lists. And some of them will have done all that preparation, only to be told that unfortunately they will not be participating. And some of them will have to play the night before, only to wake up and do day 1 all over again the next morning. So a longer and more difficult road for these guys. But for most of them, they're just glad to have a chance to play. Many of these players did have a chance to earn their spots outright. We're playing down to the very last round and just snuck in on 18 points, but they could have got to 19. But here we are, 10 of them, 3 or 4 slots. I don't remember.
Yeah, 3 slots for, at this point, 8 players.
All right.
So we're gonna have to do some interesting figuring out of how we're going to run this tiebreaker, but we'll have that figured out and announce to those players shortly.
Yeah, but a couple of very good seasons. Second Blue breaking the all-time IP record for a single season, and Danabor tying the previous record. So a lot of players with a lot of top 8s. We had 5 players with 3 or more top 8s. this season. So despite 3 meta shifts in 5 weeks, a couple players stayed true to themselves and were able to adapt to great success. So this is a game that does have some random elements to it, but it's also one in which the proven good players are able to really rise to the top.
Yeah, I think Bruce by God top 8 at the last 3 or 4 events, if I remember correctly.
I think Bruce by God has 4 and Second Blue has 4.
Yeah, Bruce by God in a row. Like
no, Bruce by God only top 8'd the previous 2, and then he top 8'd the first event of the season and one of the ones in the middle. I can't actually remember which one. Apologies to Bruce by God.
Yeah, they're all with different decks. He had the big Xenon deck. This week he had the Arch Report. He's just definitely showing himself to be able to put all these different decks and show result.
Yeah, Bruce by God has shown himself both as a deck builder and as a extremely qualified player. His ETS performance last year was good but not standout, and then he kind of came into his own in Team League. Putting it mildly, I suppose.
Where he put SPG Revenge on his back. In the 5 weeks that they won, only one player other than Bruce by God won a match.
Yeah.
So single-handedly carrying them quite literally through 4 weeks, and he was there all the way through. He was their team captain, so that certainly got the attention of a couple of people. And 4 top 8s. That was a pretty convincing transition from Team League play to others. So he's one of the players to watch. Second Blue, of course, we've talked about him before, but he also has 4 top 8s, including 3 second place finishes. Probably just at this point just to keep in theme with the name, right? Can't break through. Unearthly, last year's Player of the Year with 3 top 8s. So
unfortunately, never managing to make past top 8.
Yes. So no wins for Unearthly this season, although he still has 6 wins to his name, so not doing too bad. I believe Farodsbro and Niamster are the other 2 that have the 3 wins. I know Farodsbro does. It might be Danabor, the other ones, but one of those 2. So the names at the top, they've had some good seasons. And it shows on the SP leaderboard, which we are now going to transition to. Woo! So
Second Blue's multitude of second place performances has earned him the leader spot, but Bruce by God, Danabor, Farodsbro, Manuas, and then our clump of people at 6 points: Child Roland, Darkness, Kangbreath, Crojan. Kangbreath on the twice. Apologies.
So good he warrants a second mention. Second mention.
Really, this page will get a whole lot more interesting after this weekend's results. We've given out a number of SP via the regular season, but we're going to see a lot more stratification after the results of the Invitational, where we'll be giving out a lot more points than any given weekly awards. The winner of that event probably going to take number 1. Second Blue might have something to say about that if he places in top 8.
When he gets second.
If Second Blue gets higher than second, if second or higher, I believe it would have to be like Bruce by God or Danabor winning for him to not be first. But after this weekend, we're definitely going to see the people who we can call maybe the best player of Eternal in set 3.
Yeah, at the moment. So we added a lot more ways to earn set 3 SP. This page looked a lot sillier last year when we were doing it and still figuring out the SP system. Nowadays, if you make top 8, you get some amount of SP. Perfect record in a Swiss, you get an SP. Everybody in the top 16 of the seasonal invitational gets a point. So, anybody who does well at an invitational, half our invitational players are going to get at least some points for their trouble. So the list is going to move around a lot. And new this season, the top IP players at the end of the season get some series points to indicate that, maybe they didn't top 8, maybe they did, but they had a pretty commanding season. They got the most points, and they are rewarded for that. And that is what pushes Second Blue over the hump into the exclusive double-digit mark, along with Bruised by God and Danabor as well. So SP this season serves as a much better indication of player success, just sort of overall, whereas previously it was very weighted towards high finishes, and someone with a single high finish, especially at the invitational level, would be miles ahead of someone who may have been a regular top 8er and player, but had never quite broken through with one of the big wins.
Yeah.
And
Once we
speaking of
get
the Invitational, we have a different format for this invitational.
Yeah. So we are calling it a modified Swiss format, and it's very similar to a regular Swiss format in the basic setup. You start with 32 players. They face off against each other. Winners play against winners. You play against someone with a similar record. The difference from the regular Swiss is there's no dropping by players. Once you reach a threshold of wins or losses, you automatically advance or are eliminated respectively. So in a way, it's a quadruple elimination format. Once a player gets 4 losses, they are removed from the Swiss Blue. And once a player gets 4 wins, they are safe and no longer need to play out their matches, as there are only 7 rounds. So, it wouldn't really matter if you won or lost from that point. This splits the tournament exactly in half, which is why we have a top 16 for the ETS Invitational, which will be a single elimination bracket. We're going to be broadcasting just one round of the round of 16, and then we're going to be covering everything else. So
historically, we always did cover every match of the top 8, and we will continue doing that.
Yes, people want to see what's going on at the invitational level. All the matches at day 2 are going to be best of 5 as well, sideboarding after 2. So a lot of chances. It is single elimination for player sanity. We tried the whole 16 rounds thing at Worlds last year, and players they kind of got tired after 12. We found so giving them a little bit of a breathing room there. But we are proud to announce that we have a $500 prize pool this time. So as large as our MSN. Actually, what was our MSN prize?
MSM was a little bit over 500 because of how the numbers worked out.
Okay, so about as large as our second largest tournament last year, and twice the size that they were last for invitationals. So $200 first place prize. Yeah, it's not a car, but that's some nice pocket money to go with 12 series points and an invite to the 2018 All-Stars event, which
will give them a chance to earn a little bit more money. It won't be quite as big as some of our other events, but
yeah. So lots of exciting stuff going on this weekend.
Yeah, we decided that since we were reducing the number of invitationals from 6 to 4, we've seen an outpour of support from the community in terms of we now are a partner, we have subs on Twitch, we have a increase in our Patreon amount that we can afford to give out a little bit more money at the invitationals. And
we don't keep any of this to ourselves, unfortunately, much to the chagrin of everybody at RNGEternal. We're still on the foundational levels, even though we are, almost a year and a half in on these tournaments. We're just trying to grow them in size and prestige and everything else. And so the money that you guys come in goes to website hosting and prize pools. That's the 2 places that we put it. So everything that comes in goes back out to the players. So if you want to support the players or you want to support us, donate to our Patreon, sub to us on Twitch, whatever you guys want to do to help us get off the ground. We've been out, blown away by, especially in set 3, the support that we have with our first 8-round tournament, over 124 people or whatever. We ended up with like 135. So a very large number of people are interested, and the fact that 60 of you have stuck around day in, day out till the end of the season, 2 months later, has been awesome for us. So we're hoping you guys can have a whole lot of fun at the Invitational and get excited to get back into it come season 2.
Yeah, I think like some of the downturn was, people saw they were out of the contention, so they didn't want to spend the time. But I think we'll see a rise in season 2, and I'm really hoping it stays a little bit more up in the numbers. It's always fun in those larger tournaments.
Yeah, a lot of people like to come out and play just to try it out, and we pride ourselves on having pretty reasonable tournaments to pick up and play. The rules are fairly friendly to people who just want to be drop-in players. If even if you're a regular, 4 weeks out of 8 with a break week is not the most taxing of schedules.
Indeed.
It's fairly easy to match it around, especially if you want to try your hand at 2 or 3, and then if it's not working for you, you just call it a season, which I know many of our tournament regulars have this particular season. We only have 3 returning Worlds players at the Invitational, Kamado Unearthly and Child Roland. So
we did see a lot of success of newer players, like all the rookies that are on those top, like what are they, 24 points? You had Second Blue, Farsbro, and Ortrick.
I think I have the numbers in front of me. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we only have 12 players invited. So less than half that are not rookies. So 20 rookies out of 32 is math is hard. 10 out of 16.
That's a good amount of
5/8. There we go.
Never do math on stream.
No, but we got there. 5/8. So 5/8 of our players are rookies. So a smidge over half, and that means that this is their first Eternal season that they're playing in. So great to see that they're coming out and having so much success.
Yep. And also, we will be doing pre-shows before each of these, correct? How early are we going on before we start doing the coverage?
Approximately 1 hour before the show starts.
Okay.
Cool. And RNG, do we have a confirmation on when the invitation will be starting this weekend?
That's going to be 11 a.m.
Okay.
We're going to do it for the longer rounds. Since we are broadcasting the whole top 8 plus 1, we want to have the extra time in, as well as figuring out what happens when both organizers and players play Modified Swiss for the first time. We're going to need a little bit of extra time in there to figure out what's going on. But it should be a good day. It's going to be tough for the PST players, but I can already hear the EU players thanking us for a 5 p.m. instead of a 6 p.m. start.
Yep. Coffee in the morning is much better than coffee at night, generally speaking.
Take a nap in the afternoon and be all set.
So it's a good talk about the Invitational. Let's pop into a couple of what the some cool decks that we think we might see at the Invitational as we move to our showcase section.
So I'm a big fan of control decks in general, and Feln was like my first faction I really took to when starting playing Eternal. So it's nice seeing Feln Control show up this weekend and do pretty well. Herod top 8 at both the LCQ and the ETS, and then also HeyYu took that same list and top forward with it also. It's interesting to see a deck that's running 10 units also run Dark Return, but when you don't have Vera, I guess that'll do.
Any champion of cunning in a storm.
Yep.
And you're not too picky about how it gets back into play, and with Vera no longer being a good source of recursion. It's not too different from playing actual Grasp in terms of cost, and at least it gives you +1/+1. So it's a hair better than playing Grasping at Darkness in this deck, and that's grasping at straws. So
yeah, and we see Feln Bloodcaster coming back. Only 2 in this list. I'd seen other lists with 4, some with 3.
Much to the chagrin of Viserius in particular, and many players in general.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of that card. He is not.
Yeah, I'm very on the fence about it. Like, I understand what it can do. Like, the whole thing was it was always good at like kind of blocking aggro, but right now we're not seeing that because you have Hailstorm, so you don't really need it. I saw in early testing there's people playing 4, but as it kind of went on through the week, the end parts started dropping, and you can see there's only 2. In addition to Hailstorm, he has Devastating Setback, which
there's only so many aggro can do to attack through 6 early game sweepers plus the whole removal suite that Felon Control is playing. But like Rex said, this deck is really hinging on those Champions of Cunning to win at the game.
Yes.
Harbinger now being vanquishable means that just about every deck is going to have a way to kill it, since nobody was really playing Suffocate before. And, it's not like Bloodcaster is going to carry the game against anything. So playing only 10 units, it's Champion of Cunning or bust. Only 2 Channel of Tempest is not usually enough burn to close out the game. And there's nothing in the sideboard there for finishers. So...
Yeah. Well, a Single Gift is a pseudo finisher, but it does not directly cause your opponent's health to go from 25 to 0.
Yeah, we see that back in the main. We see an Omen, even the Rain of Frogs as a one of.
Yeah.
So
we see Devastating Setback, 1 Rain of Frogs, 1 Gift, and 2 channels that would like to go face. All of these cards are negated by Cobalt Waystone. Of course, Felon is the deck that has the best ways to answer face Aegis in Vara's favor. It used to run Steward of the Past, no longer, of course. But it also gets face pings with Black Sky Harbinger. But if you really want to,
Bloodcaster ult.
Yeah. But if you really want to Rain of Frog something, and your opponent, say is on the play, they play a Cobalt Waystone on turn 4. Are you really going to take your turn off to just Vara's favor their face, and next turn they can maybe play the Champion of Cunning you wanted to pull out of their hand, or if you don't have a Vara's favor, you're waiting until turn 6 to play a Black Sky Harbinger to play your Rain of Frogs, and they've probably already played the card you want to get rid of.
The Ikaria usually.
Yep.
But face Aegis doesn't come up too much out of some of the decks that Felon is most worried about. So.
This is true.
It's more for the mirror with both people playing 4 Cobalt Waystone. Rain of Frogs it's a 6-drop. You play it with Vara's favor on turn 6, and usually nobody's run out their champion by then. But if champion does get frogged out of Felon, I don't think you can win the game.
No.
I actually don't think you have enough cards left in your deck that can kill the opponent to win the game.
Yeah, there was some lists going around that were still running Rindra, but I think with the rise of time mid-range decks, Rindra just looks kind of silly. It just like
all the hardcore control players turn up their noses at playing an actual unit that has stats. Ugh.
I will note, the spicy card that is in this list is the Dark Return. So while you can no longer Vara back a Champion of Cunning, you still kind of have 6, provided they weren't frogged or, it doesn't get killed with a feeding time, etc., etc.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier, but it's an interesting take on the deck. I don't know that this is going to be the build going forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of builds over the weekend.
Yeah, so people are all over the place, but the basic idea is here. You play a lot of removal spells, you play some Champions of Cunning, and you hope that gets the job done.
The standard film game.
There's another list I saw that had 3 mainboard stewards. There's another one that was kind of similar to this, but it ran a couple Duraka along with Gift and Channel. So it's just like the top end's so heavy, but you have stuff like Hailstorm and Cold Blood to kind of get through that early to mid game that you can kind of run those. The list
the older film plan.
Yeah, the list I'm currently running has 2 Durakas and 2 Channel, but it still just kind of feels weird because Duraka's your only Annihilate hit, so in some matchups where they're sitting there with this dead card, then you slam it, it's dead. I'm running 2 Unseals to kind of protect against that, but Felon's just in that weird spot where there's just so many versions, nothing feels just right, and you're relying so much on just Champion of Cunning. There's no like poking, doing this. It's like I gotta draw 2 to 3 of these.
Yeah, Felon doesn't have any good cards anymore. Is what we're kind of beating around the bush on.
Yeah.
It's got
Anything.
Champion of Cunning, and it's missing Argenport's Slay. It doesn't have any other card on that power level.
Yeah.
So.
It has these good reactive cards for them.
At least it had Crest. If we did not get Crest of Cunning, Felon would not be a deck.
Yeah.
I can say that with certainty.
To be fair, I think that may have been true before these changes.
Yeah, I mean, Felon got better with the inclusion of Hailstorm, not worse. It just...
I mean, before the Vara nerf.
Did not help. Vara was
before the Vara nerf.
Better way to play more Champions of Cunning.
Yeah, of course. But before the Vara nerf, if Crest of Cunning did not exist, I would have been shocked to have seen as much Felon control as we did, just because of how much the extra duels and extra card selection helped that deck.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about this one enough. Let's move on to our next showcase deck, which is
Bruised by Gods. I've been calling it either Inquisitor Tavrod or maybe Tavrod Arc Inquisitor, because this is still Argenport midrange. We see Rip Knife Assassin instead of Instigator. Or I guess maybe
alongside Instigator,
or as a 4 instead of the 2 Instigators. Crownwatch Paladin is the 2-drop slot, which hasn't really seen any play in significant quantities since it was nerfed around about a year ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We still see we see Arc Interrogator, which is sometimes in, sometimes out of the deck. We see 4 Crownwatch Traders, which is kind of the first time that card has seen a lot of play. Presumably because it now, its biggest predator used to be Torch. Your 4-drop being answered by a 1-drop, if it doesn't have some other effect, is a little. You're probably going to die. In the list, if you're up against aggro and they just kind of torch your 4-drop and swing through, you're in bad shape. And it's just another thing that kind of dies to Torch in terms of like control decks that used to be playing a whole lot of Torch as well. Then of course we see Inquisitor's Blade. Now, again, we kind of hinted about this a little bit earlier, but kind of the way games often play out is you play a 2-drop, maybe an Arc Interrogator. On turn 4, you put an Inquisitor's Blade onto one of them. You swing in, you get in a bunch of damage because suddenly your ground pounder now is flying. You have a 7/4 Arc Interrogator or a 5/2 Aegis Crownwatch Paladin. But hey, say it dies. Well, you slam your Tavrod on turn 5, you swing with your Tavrod, and oh look, the Inquisitor's Blade is back. It's now an 8/1. It's now an 8/1 weapon. It has Destiny, so you probably immediately slam it onto your Tavrod. So now it's a 13/8 flying endurance monstrosity. And then you draw an extra card off the top of your deck. The first time I saw this, as I said earlier, it was just a kind of shock moment of, the deck noticeably lacks Protect now, though. 2-cost Protect is very hard to hold up if you're not, say, in Cambrai, with this deck is running 24 raw power and then 4 Seeks. Cambrai runs usually in the range of like 5 to 7 fetches, some of those being Find the Way, which give you even more power. But with the additional Rip Knife Assassin as a defensive 2-drop, or that can also snowball in the right matchups, this deck kind of has a bit more, say, snowball-y free win potential than Argenport Midrange used to. It was already kind of a deck that could just kind of win on the back of Tavrod hitting 2 things instead of 0.
So there's a lot to say about this deck from my end. And jumping onto the back of your Protect point, I think it's a sign of the times that we see to reinvigorate in the sideboard of the Argenport midrange deck, sort of playing the Protect slot against the Permafrost. Reinvigorate does give a unit bonus points for each of its battle skills, and that's sort of the theme here. So it plays sort of a hybrid duty between Permafrost counter and Finest Hour. So it's not the worst card to be playing in this slot, but you would definitely never see that card if Protect was on 1 power.
Indeed.
And this is a much more aggressive version of Argenport. It's playing 8 weapons. It's playing a lot more 2-drops. Both Ripknife Assassin and Crownwatch Paladin have Warcry, both of which set up really well for Interrogator, which also plays really well with the various weapons. Both of those units also have 2 battle skills, which means they're pumped up by Unseen Commando, allowing this deck to get off to some pretty aggressive starts that you didn't usually see. Argenport decks do. They sort of meandered until they played Impending Doom and then Tavrod, and then they sort of won the game or lost the game there, depending on whether or not they drew a 6th power. If they did, they usually lost. Unless they played Tavrod with Protect backup.
Exactly.
But
another thing to note with Unseen Commando, with Crownwatch Trader, if you put Inquisitor's Blade, it gives it flying, and it already has Quick Draw, so there's another double battle skill.
Crownwatch Trader has Endurance, so it already has 2 battle skills built in, which means that when it attacks, it punches through Sandstorm Titan. And I've actually been playing Trader Argenport quietly in the wee hours of the morning since set 3 dropped. So I am well aware of Crownwatch Trader. It never saw widespread adoption because the Argenport midrange deck was just, the core was so powerful at that time. You didn't need to resort to strategies like playing weapons or having Unseen Commando synergy. You just punched everything with Slay and Vanquish and it died. But nowadays we get to see some of those, slightly weaker but still quite powerful techniques come to the fore. Crownwatch Trader dodges a whole bunch of removal spells, from Annihilate to Vanquish to Permafrost. So it's almost as defensible as Tavrod, and also with Unseen Commando backup, attacks through Sandstorm Titan, and even without it, attacks through just about any aggressive unit out there. Whirling Duo, whatever, doesn't even get to trade. So some pretty powerful cards here, and Ripknife Assassin buffing them up. Crownwatch Trader and Auric Interrogator both really love to play with Warcry, so seeing all those Warcry effects back into Argenport for the first time really is really cool to see. Crownwatch Paladin, probably the weakest card in the deck to my eyes, but it does give
it's mostly an aegis thing to put a weapon onto, kind of akin to Silverwing Familiar, except it's
much worse.
It comes out a turn earlier, so you can curve Paladin into Bloodletter, and of course, Bloodletter's lifesteal is redundant on Silverwing Familiar.
Silverwing Familiar has the advantage of winning you the game when it sticks, though. Whereas even a 6 or a 5/4 Crownwatch Paladin doesn't necessarily win the game.
Well, without plate, I don't know if that's really true. It's more painful to swing a Silverwing Familiar into, for example, a Impending Doom or a Shelterwing Rider with an Inquisitor's Blade, because you can't.
Yes. No.
You can
nowadays,
swing a Crownwatch Paladin into one, and you're kind of happy with that, actually.
Yes, you're glad to trade your bad card for their less bad card.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Crownwatch Paladin, not so great anywhere. We're seeing in this game a lot of the time 2/2 to 2/1 is Death Knell, because you'll notice the card that's absent from this list that was played a lot in Argenport right after its most recent buff was Stone Powder Alchemist.
Yes.
Which also synergizes with Commando and lives forever. But maybe that card's not quite as dead as I'm implying here, because it was really played as an aggro counter. And this deck is a lot more tempo-oriented, wants to attack more, doesn't really need to sit back and wait for its Tavrod, so it's less worried about aggro. And aggro is also totally gone at the moment. So we may see it come back, but it's missing from this list at least.
Yeah, like this is the new aggro base.
Yeah, this is an even more aggressive mid-range.
Yeah, you have your 8 2-drops, and then what's that? 12 3-drops?
10 2-drops, actually.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're also playing 2 Instigators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the new base of aggro, basically. There's no more Oni rodents.
This is what peak rekenner looks like. You may not like it, but this is what it looks like. Yeah, you're playing 8 weapons. You're playing, 2 drops with Warcry. This is modern rekenner. I don't know how Unearthly isn't all over this deck right now. It does everything he wants to do. Play Tavrod and be rekenner. So keep an eye on this one for the Invitational. And Unearthly, if you're watching, this is my pick for you.
You just get to pick everyone's deck. That would be interesting.
I will say one final note. If you don't own Chronowatch Trader, I didn't. Fair. It's a legendary. Where we just had a lot of metagame shakeups. Some people have been crafting a lot of new decks. It's not as good. There have definitely been situations where I've felt the difference. But a Pending Doom can fit into that 4-drop slot. That's something I've been paying attention to. Like, hey, which actually would be better here? And I think Chronowatch Trader really would be the better card, but it's not so much of a difference that it makes the deck unplayable.
Chronowatch Trader very good into Whirling Duo and Highwayman to a degree. Obviously, Highwayman can ping it, and then you don't really want to block. But it blocks the Bandit Queens of the world. It blocks the Whirling Duos, and the fact that it has endurance to be back on defense is just very valuable in these games where even aggro and even mid range want to race so much.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Huru and the Feln bringing back the Permafrost, having something that dodges Vanquish and Permafrost is a great spot to be in the metagame right now. So.
Yep. Speaking of Huru, let's take a peek at a Huru deck.
Woo! All right. This is also what rekenner aggro looks like nowadays. It's a little bluer than we remember, but Crownwatch Paladin is back. We've got Finest Hours. We've got 2 1s for 1, and we've got Kothon, the 8-drop. So, Huru Pacifier combines with Unseen Commando and Valkyrie Enforcer, just like in every other Huru deck in existence right now. And Shelterwing Rider pops up. This deck is interesting because it makes use of the unseen synergies to a much higher degree, playing the Darkveil Agent, most recently seen in the early builds of Hulkbuster's FJP aggro deck, where it was the worst card in that deck. And as a way to put Aegis back on Shelterwing Rider, make Huru Pacifiers incredibly obnoxious and maybe protect an Unseen Commando. Once again, it is played alongside no other Night sources that I can see, thus making it somewhat of a hit or miss card.
Yeah, you have to play it once you already have your threats on the board, unless you have multiple in hand.
Yes. In which case, you should probably play the threats. So you play your threats first, then you play your Darkveil Agent, and it acts as a sort of slow protect, which this deck is interestingly lacking entirely, main and sideboard. And the really interesting card here is a card that we have not seen at all, and it's real competitive debut, and that is, I can't actually read it, I think it's Lida, Most Skilled.
Lida, Most Skilled.
So Lida continues the trend of primal cards randomly having Overwhelm. Overwhelm is turning into
a lot of primal cards with
one of Primal's major things, but it's a 4/5 Overwhelm for 5 with Unseen Ally Killer. So it's a 4/5 killer card, which is very good at picking off enemy Huru Pacifiers, Unseen Commandos, Valkyrie Enforcers. So it's sort of good against the same kind of deck that this is playing, and it can pick off a lot of the cards out of the lower to the ground Argenport midrange. Still doesn't brawl all that well with the bigger stuff out there, but the fact that you've got a card that you can drop down, killer a flyer out of the way, and really get your Shelterwing Riders going is where a lot of this card's power comes in. And it's just killer with with Overwhelm gives it enough battle skills to be buffed up by Unseen Commando, and then you're taking down opposing Sheltering Wing Riders, Impending Dooms, Crown Watch Traders. So you get a lot more excited there. And with Finest Hour, you can sort of play the Twilight Hunt game where you surprise buff up your killer and take down a big threat. So it gives Huru a new angle to attack. Playing your own pacifiers, you can't really rely on Rune Hammers. You'll note that this deck is playing the somewhat non-bow Hammer of Might that it can only sometimes play. Although, Hammer of Might, pretty good card, especially if it's on an evasive flyer, and this deck has a lot of evasive flyers. Crown Watch Paladin being the only card that really takes to the ground. And the sideboard has a copy of 4 Nostrix. Not usually a card that we see too much of, but Nostrix plus Sheltering Wing Rider kind of is. We talked about Sheltering Rider plus Plate. Well, a 10/10 Aegis is pretty nice no matter how you get it. And it gives the deck a way to go a little bit longer against any of the mid-range decks that push it up the curve. It's a little tough to cast since you're kind of lacking in power, but the extra power really is there.
Yeah, I will say Nostrix effect is best on units that naturally have Aegis, and this deck is running 12.
Yep.
If you get +5/+5 to a Snowcrust Yeti, it's suddenly hitting way above its weight class in terms of being a 1-drop.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of interesting stuff going on, especially with the unseen, not even sub-theme, but main theme here. There's finally enough cards in Huru for you to really go off with that theme. We saw a lot of people trying it with Feln, didn't quite work. But now with the pacifier to really hold together that commando in the 3 slot. Kothon's an unseen, Dark Veil's an unseen, Sheltering Lita, so a lot of synergies there. And if you can land that Dark Veil and just sort of pseudo stand together your team, well, Harsh Rule starts to look real silly. So a lot of cool things going on there, and another new way to build aggressive aggro decks in the new metagame.
Yep. An interesting thing is there's 27 power. A lot of decks you see it's on 25s, and you have your various favor cards or seek powers. This is just 27 power, no way to search out anything. So it's definitely
the Huru favor is not really good for this style of deck.
No.
Although maybe if this deck evolves, we start to see Eilin's favor and the Ward Wielder, the new 5/5 if you have Aegis card pop up. I know Manu was experimenting with that style of build this weekend to no breakout success.
I believe a 2/2 or 3/2 finish. So not exactly a breakout finish.
Everybody's trying with the new cards. It's we were 3 days in, so but it's sweet to see another area to explore.
Yeah, I saw some decks on ladder playing like similar sort of ideas with like Mistfell Drakes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Mistfell Drake for the free Aegis. The problem is then you're playing a 7-drop alongside your 2-drop aggro card. Yeah.
And if you're not running any other ways to give yourself an Aegis, and your opponent Varus favors your face or something along those lines, then suddenly your Ward Wielder is
a 2/2
a lot less impressive. And if you ever do cast that 7-drop, it's a 3/3. So not exactly what an aggro deck wants to do for 7 cost.
My number one complaint about this deck is that it is not playing the most fun of the unseen, which is the 2/2 that gives that rolls the random battle skill.
Tranquil Scholar.
Tranquil Scholar. Right.
Yeah.
Bismuth is on is a little
which can do all sorts of interesting things, usually by rolling revenge and then getting out of hand. But double damage Sheltering Rider. Hey, that's another 10/5. So if the Dark Veil agent doesn't end up panning out, maybe go that route.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's better, but definitely a fun card that I'd love to see played competitively. I mean, you played it in Combray Beats for a while. Give Reality Warden Overwhelm randomly.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a thing that just got overlooked and not really tested, or if it was like tested and just found to be.
I think it got found to be pretty bad, since rolling flying is kind of a miss in this deck.
Yeah.
A lot of things already have Aegis. Reckless got added to the pool as a totally worthless skill. So That card did get a little bit worse, and in this deck, there's more bad skills you can roll than good ones, I think. But it's always a fun card to see when you're talking about Unseen Tribal. And we are coming to the close of our show, I think, as it's now 9:30.
Yeah, we had a long one today, even though we didn't have an interview, but we definitely had a lot to discuss.
Yeah, we had the campaign, 2 tournaments, a lot going on before the Invitational, and we'll have to see how that goes over the weekend, as it's both days, 17th and 18th. And
Indeed.
We'll have pre-shows, the tournaments, and then we'll come back next week and talk about it all.
Yeah, so we'll be starting at around about 10 a.m. EST for the pre-show. If you would like to tune into that, our plan at the moment is to have a 2 or 3 person analyst desk. We'll go over the decks. We'll go over the players on day 1. Then on day 2, we'll kind of talk about the results. Previous invitationals, we only really had round about 30 matches having been played on day 1, but this invitational, we're going to have about 100 matches played on day one. So we'll have a little bit better of a grasp on the meta. Win rates will mean a little bit more. And our current plan, I will be on the pre-show both days, and we are currently lining up exactly who will be on the show for days for the days alongside.
Yeah, I know I'm pretty sure confirmed on Sunday, and I am available on Saturday as well, so I will be putting my input there and rooting for most primal decks.
So as a made-up number, I think we're going to have 94 distinct matches across 32 players on day 1.
Well, some players will be falling out before, it won't be a 7-round Swiss, or it won't be 16 matches for everyone.
That's not a 16-round Swiss. That's the modified value. I'm just not sure if I did the drop math correctly.
Yeah, so it'll be a lot of matches. How about that?
Yeah, we'll be talking about players who went 4x rather than players who went 3-0, and so yeah, I mean that's potentially only one match, but then we're going to be talking about like the 4-3s and the matchups they faced and what they might have to do going in. So a lot more player stories to talk about, and a lot more points getting thrown around when you're talking about top 16 instead of top 8.
Indeed.
We will be continuing our tradition of top 8 predictions, because literally everybody in the tournament is 50-50 to go top 16. So we're making it a little bit tougher on ourselves, and we invite you guys to make your own personal predictions as to who you think is going to do well. Players are starting to make some pretty good names for themselves, and some fan favorites are emerging. Anybody who doesn't play Chalice, for instance, always a big favorite.
Yeah. Chalice, not the most, not a deck that people like to see on the broadcast often. Unfortunate for the people that like Chalice or the control players out there.
Yeah, my only request is that if Second Blue makes the finals again, we find out for real is he role playing, or is he just saving himself?
Okay, finally finish it, or just like the name.
Yeah, just gotta keep it consistent.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, should be a very fun tournament. A lot of matches, a lot of Eternal, very high stakes. And players have had 1 week to feel out what the meta is, and this time it's for real. Yeah. So sometimes you get the real exciting decks that come out of left field. People have been saving their secret tech for this invitational. Not so much for this one, as just about every deck is going to be kind of out there, since we've only had the 1 week, and it has been quite the major shakeup. But really interesting to see. Does aggro come back? Not usually for these larger tournaments, but with the new Swiss style, maybe that favors it more. You got a big elimination afterwards, and aggro can maybe sneak by. Mm-hmm. So are people going to go with slow mid-range decks? Are they going to go over the top with the control? Are we going to see 4 people with Felm control go 0-4? Probably.
The Felm tradition of going O and X in invitationals goes all the way back to season 1 of last year.
Yes, where our own guy above me went 0-2 and never picked up a tournament match again.
That's not true. I played in season 2.
So Yeah, Felon has never looked better positioned, except for those times than it did, and it has continued to be unsuccessful. So let's see if that tradition continues, and if we stay in the post-horror Straver, a bunch of things happened, and then Tavrod wins.
Yeah, can we end as we begin?
Yeah. Well,
of course, sorry, go ahead.
We can certainly not N as we began, as I notice now that all the N's in my name are uncapitalized, and I'm being trolled by my co-host.
Yeah. I did that.
Whoops.
That's okay.
Yeah, of course. Are there any viewer questions about the Invitational, about the last week of results, about us, about what we think about the new campaign, anything like that out there?
What do you guys think we're going to see at the Invitational? Like, who's going to win? Who's going to take it down?
Ooh, who's going to win? Interesting. Honestly, I think now that RNGee has broken his curse of not making it to the final day of a tournament, taking second at Worlds, I think he's looking pretty strong.
Me? Now that RNGee has made
it. Sorry. Now that Unearthly has. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say taking second at Worlds. Like, I'm pretty proud, but I don't remember that at all. Surprisingly.
No. Now that Unearthly has broken the curse of not making day 2.
Maybe I'm just following in the proud footsteps of some of our EU players and getting totally hammered before playing the event. Yeah, Unearthly, always a safe pick for top 8. Never a great pick for top 6. So.
Of course, he has made day 2 before, but he's rarely made it past top 8. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Kamado, I hear, could be a world champion for a reason, and another strong contender. Second Blue is our season 1 everything, so a lot of people are going to be cheering for him. I wonder if Danabor is going to run back some of his Ikaria Blue magic that he had that one weekend, and we might see a resurgence out of him. Obviously, Bruised by God is either going to make it big or crash and burn, as is tradition for him.
Maybe there's a possibility of an all-rookie top 8.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. And I wonder what that would say to our veteran players. They'd probably pass it off. They'd say, oh, good, okay, the younger generation can handle it. We can retire safely now. But maybe it'll light a fire under them, and we'll see a little bit more competition, as a lot of our veterans are currently on hiatus. Some because that's what they do, and some just because they're taking a break.
Mm-hmm. I was talking earlier about how Angry Chicken is kind of in his last year of university.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully he, sneak back into like season 3 when it's summer. When he's post college, working himself to death at a job, and show the world that he still has what it takes. Maybe we see Toth come back. He's working on a graduate degree as far as I've heard, which is even more work.
From what I've heard from Neon, graduate degree just means you play 90 hours of Eternal a week.
Well, I think he's at the ending stage of a graduate degree, whereas Toth isn't quite so advanced.
Yeah. I don't know. He turns salt water into rocket fuel.
I think it was algae into rocket fuel.
No, there we go. All right, so in the absence of any particularly burning questions from the chat, we thank you guys for coming out here to check it out. We're going to have a much more in-depth best of 3 after the Invitational, since
Indeed.
There will be so much high-level stuff to cover, and hopefully a lot of cool decks, but you'll see all of that at the pre-show. So thanks for you guys for coming out, and we will see you on Saturday.
Indeed. See you on Saturday.